chapter number 1, which is data processing and information. We will be discussing chapter 1 today. That is our data processing and information. And since our last class, I guess we have already discussed regarding the terminologies that you understand, like what does it means to process the data. That means that if I have any other example of any sort of data, the first thing I need to do is that I need to collect that data. And even before collecting that data, I first need to recognize the difference, like what are going to be the facts, what are going to be the facts and figures or the information or data that I need to process it. Like, for example, if I give you an example of if you are working for a software company and you want to create or your boss or your manager has asked to create a software. So the first thing you are going to do is you are going to collect some sort of information so that you can combine all of it into one place and then you can work onto it. But even before collecting the piece of information, you first need to look forward that what information you are going to collect. Like, for example, is it going to be your facts? Is it going to be your figures? Is it going to be the data? And the second thing that is most important that you need to recognize right here is that the credibility of that information, that how much you can rely on that information. So even before processing it or even before going it to the next stage, the first thing you need to understand is that what is that information going to be. So that is going to be the processing part. But even before the processing, the first thing that we have already discussed into our last class, that is going to be that the two things that we are going to consider. The first thing is going to be the data, and the second thing we are going to consider is going to be your information. And we have already discussed in our last class that data basically means that if I am referring to some example of any raw numbers, letters, symbols, or sound, but one thing is important is that they have no meaning. They have no meaning. Like, for example, I can say that if I'm working with the data, it has no meaning, it is not sensible, and you cannot work with that data. Like, for example, if I say that 7A866B, like, for example, if this is if I'm giving you an example of this data, this is like some sort of raw numbers, letters, or symbols. Like, they have no meaning at all. So this is an example of our data. But if I give it some sort of meaning, like, for example, if I just say that this is a product code, or if this is a serial number of something. So that means that when I give the data a meaning, so then it becomes meaningful. But at first point, I can say that this data it isn't going to be much sensible. When I give it a meaning, then it becomes one. Like, for example, I can give you an example of a product code. I can give you an example of a car registration number or even a postal code as well. You can stop me anytime if you have any queries. The second thing that we are going to discuss right here is going to be your information, like this information. And information is one that is the data with its context and meanings. That means that now when I am giving my data some sort of meaning or some sort of information, so it becomes a data, so it becomes an information. A person, like, obviously, if I give you an example of a person right here, so the point is that if a person is going to read a raw data, the person is not going to understand it because he's not aware of that. Like that is not sensible enough. But similarly, if the person is going to look at the information, so that is going to be quite knowledgeable and sensible for him, because he's accurately going to understand that what this data is, because it is going to point on to some meaning. It is going to refer to some meaning. Like for example, like I have given you the same example that this is the data. If I give it as a product code, then it is meaningful. For example, some sort of currency, but if I name it a currency, then it becomes an information. Like for example, I have written here 359. There could be various examples for that. Like for example, 359 could be a password, 359 could be a product code, 359 could be any sort of an address. But you know what? It becomes meaningful. It becomes an information when I give it a meaning, I give it a purpose. For example, I have given it a meaning like $359. So now this is an example of an information, because you know that this is a data with its context and its meaning. So I hope the first area from your exam, which is that you need to differentiate between data and information, is clear. And now we are moving on to our next title, which is data sources. Okay, so now we are moving on to the next title from our book, that is your data sources. So we are going to discuss this in detail. So data sources. First of all, in the starting of the class, I discussed with you that, for example, if you are working as a manager of a company and you are requested to create a software, so the first thing you are going to do is that you are going to collect that information. And then I broke down the information part into two of the stages. The first stage is going to be your data. The second stage is going to be your information. Now, I'm discussing with you in terms of that the data and information that you have collected right now. What is going to be the sources of that data? So this is what we are going to discuss right here. That I can have two different types of sources. whenever I'm collecting some examples of data. The first source can be, for example, the first source is to be known as a direct source, and the second source is going to be an indirect source. But let's first discuss the direct source one. That So direct source basically means that first of all you are collecting some data from a direct source. Like I can say that I am collecting data from a primary source. It is not secondary. A primary source is something like, for example, I am recording the data myself. I went somewhere and I asked the person regarding that data. So that data is not coming to me from any sort of departments to departments, or that data is not coming from me from 1 to 2%. I'm directly working onto that data. That means that I'm directly linked with that. So direct source, first of all, it is going to be a primary source, the first source, and the second thing is that it is going to be used for the same purpose for which it was collected. Like you cannot use it for any other purpose. Direct source is basically the data which is collected for the purpose for which is to be used. So 2 points right here. That means that the data has to be even collected or requested by the person who often is required to use the data, or that data must not already exist for another purpose as well. And when collecting the data, you might have to go yourself. For example, I can give you, like, for example, visiting the shop and noting down the prices, visiting the other shops, carrying out a survey. Like, let's work on one of the example right here. Like, for example, if you are working as a researcher and your task is to collect a survey of 30 shops to check frequently purchased products. So, for example, if this is a scenario, so what are you are going to do right here is that you are going to go into shop by shop, one by one, and you are going to collect the survey yourself. Like that survey could either be in any form. Like for example, when it comes to direct one, you can take the interview, or you can work on to some forms of questionnaires, or you can take any sort of form with you, document with you, that you, the whole solely the person who is working with this form is going to conduct that. So this is an example of a direct source. That means that you are going yourself, you are visiting the shop, you are noting down the prices, you are visiting the websites, you are chalking down the things that you are working onto them, or you are carrying out a survey. You can also use questionnaires right here as well. Questionnaires now, it is one of the most important aspect as well when collecting the data. Like for example, if I'm right now teaching here, and if you have any question, the one thing that both of you are going to do is that you are going to raise your hand and you are going to ask that, sir, I have a question. So this is an example of a direct source. But similarly, if I provide you with my recordings or any recorded lecture, that is not a direct source. Now, that is going to be an indirect source, because you cannot ask me questions. I will not be available there. So, questionnaires are one of the most important areas as well. Let it be in teaching and learning, or let it be if you are working as a researcher on any of your object. The first thing when you are going to do is you are going to question, you are going to gather specific form of data, you are going to provide them with your opinions, with your facts, that I think this, I think this, what do you think? Like what is the product that you frequently buy? You can even visit, or you can even ask like more number of people, like what are the products that you use in your daily life. So all of this comes in your questionnaires. Like you collect a large number of responses and then you apply your statistical data into that, so that you can make a conclusion. For example, 40 out of 20 people I have questioned or I have interviewed says that they prefer to take online classes other than physical classes. So this is an example. So I hope that I am able to make up your mind regarding this questionnaires, regarding this interviews and all of that. Now, the primary aspect of the questionnaire is to elicit the information required to enable your analysis, to gather your information as well. We have questionnaires that we have discussed. We have interviews as well. So interviews is quite one of the most important areas as well, because when it comes to interview, you are uh, uh, interviewing your interview one to one. So there's not going to be any sort of miscalculation, because you are yourself asking those questions. So till now, do you guys have any difficulty in this? You can ask me anytime if you have any questions. Peter, anyone have any confusions, any questions? Should I carry on? Now, I'm going to discuss the indirect sources of data. So even before proceeding, can you guys define me any examples? Like, what do you think? What can be an indirect source of data? Any guesses?
Sir, am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Okay, so one source of indirect data could be social media platform
Okay, indirect source. And why do you think that this is an indirect source?
because they analyze the trends, sentiments, and engagement from the social media post, helps them to, for example, it's from a business perspective. It would help the
Hmm.
business to get to know its customers and all.
Hmm. Anything from your side, Beta Mehak? Hello, Mehak, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Anything from your side for indirect sources?
Not really, sir. That was it.
So, are you able to differentiate between a direct and an indirect source?
Yes.
Like, the first thing is that your concept should be clear. So, just in case, even if there is any other question, you can respond to that easily. The first thing that you need to understand right here is that direct source is something that you are asking it like yourself, but an indirect source is something that like as Aliza, yes, right. Aliza said that social media is like something that I cannot ask that person. For example, if I'm reading something and I am focusing only onto that is written by someone else, so that is going to be an indirect source, because I cannot question that person. So, in terms of indirect sources, we can say that that is data collected from a secondary source. That means that I am collecting data from a secondary source that already exists for another purpose. Direct sources, indirect sources, they are being collected from a secondary source. And one more thing is that that data might already exist. like one important thing is that when I was talking with respect to the direct source means that that data is going to be collected first time, and it is going to be used only for that purpose and only for that time period. Whereas when I'm working onto an indirect source, that means that that data has already been written, that data has already been published, or that data might already exist. Like for example, if I ask you to write an article on students or teaching and learning, so you are going to go through some newspapers or some articles, right? So when you are going through those articles and those newspapers, those are not the primary sources because you have not created them. You are searching your data from secondary sources which are created by someone else. That means that that is an indirect source, and that article could be used by millions of people for millions of purposes. Whereas when it comes to a direct source, you only have to cater a specific purpose and that's it. Whereas if I'm talking in terms of an indirect source, so indirect source is that it might already exist or it is a secondary source. So one thing should be clear right here. So that means that the data that you are working on, it can refer from any other organization to any other organization, or that data could be even be collected from for any other purpose as well. For example, right here, I can say that carrying out a survey of customers who have purchased trains from other shop. In this case, the price will be paid by the customer, which may have different prices to charge now, so that it have been discounted. For example, you went to a shop and now you are not interviewing or you are not questioning. You are looking on an indirect source. It could be a document, it could be a form, it could be a receipt that is already purchased by the customers, and you are focusing onto that or you are working onto some proofs or some documentations. Like if you have any piece of paper, you can check that the amount that the customers have purchased, or if you can make a conclusion onto that. So this is an indirect source. Like one indirect source of information that is commonly used is an electoral register. And in terms of your past paper and in terms of your exam, there was one of the question, and in that question, you was requested to define that what is an electoral register. So this is one of the question from your exam. Uh, that was around for 8 marks. Indirect sources have an electoral registers, and you were asked to define this electoral register. So let's discuss that. So basically, there are governments and organizations that keeps a register of people who are registered to vote in their households. It's similarly like that register contains the name, the addresses, and the people who are elected, or it enables them to vote into the elections. Like, for example, if you want to vote, you have to be 18 plus. So an electoral register is a register that contains the details, the names and addresses of the people that are allowed to vote into an election. It can also be used for your credit references as well, like which person lives in which house, and furthermore, these also can be used in your marketing as well. So let me write right here as well for yourself that these are registers that contains names, addresses, or other important information of people who are elected or enabled to vote in election. And furthermore, these electoral registers, which is an example of an indirect source, is also used in your marketing or for keeping or storing important information of customers who are elected to vote. This was one of the questions from your past paper. So this is why I'm focusing on to that. They can also be used by uh, credit uh, credit referencing agencies. Credit referencing agencies to check that if the person is living there or not. It can also be used by businessmen that want to send marketing emails. Like sending data is one of the biggest business, and you know what, buying and selling data is also being used by companies. Like for example, if they want to have the data of some students, so they can send their email, so they can send their marketing messages. So this also can be used right here, and I have included that right here as well, like in terms of your marketing. Now let's move on to the advantages and disadvantages of gathering data from direct and indirect sources. So the general rule is that collecting data for direct, in terms of direct source, it has to be onto that purpose for which it is being collected. And whereas in terms of an indirect source, that means that I am collecting data, but my purpose is not defined. I can use it for any secondary purpose. But right now we are going to understand the advantages and the disadvantages for that. So let's start with the first one, direct data and then indirect data. First thing is that your direct data is going to be highly relevant because what is needed is collected. You are not collecting anything that is not important. So I can write right here in terms of your direct data and in terms of your indirect data. One important point is right here that this data is highly accurate. This data is only for that intended. This data is only for that intended purpose. The original source is known and trusted. Okay. The data is always collected from trusted source. Source is known. It can take a long time to gather original data rather than use already existing data. Okay. One more point I can write right here that it takes time collecting the original data. For example, if I'm asking you to write an article, you do not need to collect that. You're just going on to gather that data and you're going to work onto that. Fourth thing is that a large sample of statistical data can be difficult to collect for one purpose. Okay, it is time taking. It can be difficult to collect. The data is likely to be up to date because it has been collected recently. Okay, up to date data. If you are working onto an direct source, this gives you an updated data, and bias can be eliminated by asking specific questions. You can write biases or arguments. Arguments can be eliminated. You can speak up any point if you have in your mind as well. I'm going to write it down here as well. The data can be collected or formatted as well. So this is for some of the pointers for your direct data source. Let's also discuss some of your points for your indirect data source. Now, in terms of an indirect data source, the first thing is that additional data that is not required will exist. That may take time to sort out, and some data that required may not exist. Okay, so I can write here that time taking to sort data that is not required may be available, and you might need to cut that data down because you do not need them, and you do not know original source. And if you do not know the original source, that means that you cannot trust the data, and the data is immediately available. Yes, you do not need to collect it. This is immediately available, ready to work on, quick, fast. If a statistical analysis is represented, then their mode. Okay, so basically, statistical analysis is when you have a large group of data and you are breaking it down so that you can prepare models such as pie chart, bar chart, histogram, and things like that. So right here it says that statistical analysis is required. Like for example, if you are working on to some statistical options, so it might create a large number of samples. It might create a large number of samples because that data is secondary. That data is not being used for that intended purpose. Data may be out of dated because it was collected at a different time. Yes, your data can be outdated. Data may be old, or you can say maybe collected other times. Original data may be biased due to some sources. Yes, there are chances for it to be biased, and your data may not be into that accurate format. Accurate format not available. So that means that you have to again sort that data or extract that data into that exact form. So till here, do you have any questions or confusion in this? Anything you want me to repeat? Any point you think
No,
should be
sir.
added right here?
No, not as of yet.
Okay, okay.